Please be warned. Inspired by a true story, deals with crimes that may contain adult themes and violence, and is intended for a mature audience.
August 28th, 1955. A young boy is kidnapped in the middle of the night, and his eventual death will change the course of events in civil rights for decades to come. In 2022, Danielle Deadwyler portrays the mother of this young boy in one of the most powerfully underrated films of this decade, in my opinion. 70 years was not so long ago, because Till was sadly inspired by a true story. Welcome to True Crime for Cinephiles. This is inspired by a true story, a podcast devoted to keeping artists honest. If you've never listened to our podcast before, first we detail the actual crimes, and then after that we discuss those facts, as well as the film on its own and how much of that was true versus Hollywood magic. Remember to please share this podcast with your friends and review us in the app you're listening to right now if you can. I'm Aaron Peterson, an accredited film critic for the Hollywood Outsider podcast and website. Joining me today are our fellow film critics and true crime devotees, John Davenport.
Hey, Aaron.
And Amanda Sink.
Hello, hello.
And this is a very, very heavy one, I would say. I mean, just the entire case and what it led to, there's a lot to it. But before we get to Till, Dark Crimes, we got some feedback about pronunciations of those names were close to accurate. So I just want to let you know. Oh, yeah? Every once in a while I get one right.
Nice job, buddy.
Oof, not bad. Not bad.
Was this like somebody from the South or something that gave you this?
It's my mother. Yep. Yep. No, she would listen to a podcast I did. No, just some people from the Polish origins said that it was strikingly close to accurate.
Love
like
that
when you say
for
Polish origins, do you mean like you're in the States?
They're from Poland.
Okay. Like directly from Poland.
Yes,
they showed up and they're like, they're
from Poland.
Here's a Knish or whatever it is.
I do not want to offend an entire country right now, but yeah, they're from Poland.
I think we've done enough offending of other countries.
I don't think so. I think there's more to do. As of this recording, just so you know, Till is on Peacock streaming. That's always subject to change. That can always fluctuate here and there. I just want to know, I don't think our schools do a very good job of teaching history in this manner. So I'm curious how much you knew of Emmett Till. And actually, I know people know the name. I just don't know how much people actually knew about the Emmett Till situation and Mamie and everything that she went through. Were you guys very well versed in this before the film, before you read up on the case, etc.?
So the story of Till is something that I've been familiar with over the years, primarily because of a lot of my exposure to true crime shows. It is something that was covered briefly in school, but not to the extent of what I've done in deep dives or how true crime handles it, or even how this movie handles it. It is something that is not as thoroughly told in schools, at least in my school age.
By the time I got to school, many, 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 many years after John.
I don't think that was necessary.
Several.
Yeah.
It felt kind of necessary, honestly.
I feel like there are so many stories and situations and horrific examples of historical events that were not taught in school for at least my age group. And I don't know how it continued to digress so much. I don't know if it's just because it was harder to hide it back in maybe your guys' age, which, like, I'm not that far behind you guys, but I am by a couple of decades. So I think the further you got away from actually living it, or your parents living it.
Unnecessary. Unnecessary.
I'm trying. That is for a purpose. That second time was for a purpose. Okay.
Sure. It hurt.
But I think that's where it was. Okay, well, now you don't really know as much about it, because if your family didn't share it and you didn't live through it, now you have to be reliant on what books are going to teach you. And this is not just around the lack of civil rights in American history, but also there are other things that America has done, that the United States has done, that was very shadowed from us in America in the school system. I feel like if it wasn't positive or if it wasn't propagandized, then it wasn't something that they were willing to teach. So this story was like glossed over, I guess I would say. And I knew that Emmett Till was someone who was lynched and was young, was a child, but I didn't know the details of the story. And I guess I didn't even realize how heavily it all was interconnected because of the timing. And I actually had seen something that afterwards, Rosa Parks actually referenced the reason why she refused to give up her seat on the bus was because she had Till in mind at that time.
It was 100 days after the verdict that she made that decision. Going along those lines, the things that I think about, Till, to me, was not a kid. He wasn't 14 years old when I heard the story as a kid. He was practically an adult. That was at least the way that the story was told to me. I'm also reflecting on how so many of us just recently learned about Tulsa from watching the Watchmen show, because the Watchmen show opens up about Tulsa.
Yeah, I didn't. That's one, too, where I had no prior knowledge of the Tulsa massacres until it started getting more notoriety in film and television, I guess I would say, where it's like, hey, how have we never talked about these things before in a very real way?
I have a different way to look at it. I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood. I learned of Emmett Till from my neighbors, not at school. That was the truth. I did not learn about Emmett Till in school. They did not teach it in school. They taught about civil rights and they taught about Martin Luther King, but it was all the peace side of it. The horrific sides of it were not taught that I can recall. But I did hear about it from my friends and neighbors and stuff when I was growing up. And I just found that interesting because, as you have conversations about this and what we do in our education system, yada, 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 you hear often, that was taught in school. I'm like, I'm telling you, it was not. I mean, slavery was taught, like the basics. It was all just very glossed over. Like nobody wanted to get into the nuts and bolts of how horrific some aspects were. And, I'm glad they didn't spare that in this film. I'm also glad they didn't glorify it, the violence in this film. They made you feel the impact without making it a Passion of the Christ moment.
Mm-hmm. You understood the gravity of it through the film rather than having to see the gravity of it through gory detail. Because I will tell you, I was someone who was like, okay, I don't know what this could look like. This wasn't like in a glorifying way. It was just, what was it? What did it look like? That it was so mortifying that she made this very bold and brave choice to have an open coffin funeral. And so I went and looked because there were newspapers that were like, these are the photos that she wants people to see. Mm-hmm. And they are beyond what I thought I would have seen.
It's horrific.
It is so horrific. It broke my heart in so many tiny pieces.
Well, if you're ready, we're going to get into the details of what actually happened until, and I will say the movie is shockingly close to the accurate case. I think they did a wonderful job. A lot of times when we're doing these inspired by a true story, true fact reveals, it's so wildly off. The next one we're going to do, which is Texas Killing Fields, way off. Way off. But this one is pretty close to what happens, and so we're going to cover that. All right, well, if you've never listened to our podcast before, new episodes are released every 2 weeks, can be found wherever you listen to podcasts or at thehollywoodoutsiders.com. You can hear episodes early by supporting the show at patreon.com/thehollywoodoutsiders or suggest a film and share your thoughts by sending an email to inspired@thehollywoodoutsiders.com. We've gotten a few suggestions. Actually, I'm going to take a look at those soon, and I appreciate people sending those in. So film and true crime fans alike are always debating how true their true crime is. Prejudices can kill, and suspicion can destroy. This is the truth behind Till. Mamie Elizabeth Carthen was born in Webb, Mississippi on November 23, 1921. A year later, her family moved to Argo, Illinois, near Chicago. She was an exceptionally intelligent woman. And in her youth, she was on the honor roll in her local high school. The first black woman to do so. It was unheard of for a black woman at that time. When Mamie was 18, she met Louis Till. Louis worked at the local corn company, but moonlighted as a boxer. He was also a ladies' man, and Mamie's parents were against the relationship. But, as she did throughout most of her life, Mamie lived her life her way. Mamie and Louis married on October 14, 1940, and it was only the next year that they were blessed with Emmett Louis Till on July 25, 1941. Outside of Emmett, not much about this relationship proved worth remembering. Mamie found out Louis was an adulterer. His womanizing ways caught up to their marriage, and they separated in 1942. Unfortunately, Louis had a difficult time letting go of Mamie, and he repeatedly forced his way into her life, even choking her almost to death, which prompted Mamie to go get a restraining order, which Louis continually violated until the judge on the case ordered Louis to either serve jail time or enlist in the U.S. Army. He chose enlistment. In 1945, while serving overseas in Italy, Louis Till died. It was much later that Mamie learned why, and also she learned it because of this case, which is a whole different story. He was executed for willful misconduct. It was a decade later, in fact, that Mamie learned the truth, that Louis was found guilty of raping an Italian woman, or two, depending on varying accounts, and was ordered to be put to death by hanging. This information was leaked by a Mississippi senator in 1955 after Emmett's murder, as if this somehow justified what happened to that boy. Now, Mamie and Emmett were on their own. She attempted other relationships. They ended in divorce. Therefore, Mamie and Emmett were each other's comfort. They were bonded in that special way single mothers and their sons often share. I know this bond well. Mamie was a strong, intelligent, ferocious mother, and she was devoted to Emmett. Per PBS, on May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court rules in the case of Brown v. Board of Education, desegregating the schools. The South called this Black Monday, as they grossly opposed this ruling. In 1955, the same year of this case, Reverend George Lee is murdered while trying to vote, and Lamar Smith is also assassinated while trying to cast his ballot. Both of these cases of blatant murder occurred in Mississippi. And again, it was only 70 years ago. August 19th, 1955. Mamie gives Emmett his father's ring. Louis had purchased this ring in Casablanca during World War II. It was a silver ring, and it had Emmett's father's initials, LT, and the date, May 25th, 1943. As Emmett was about to embark on a trip to visit his family and friends in Mississippi the next day, Mamie wanted him to finally take possession of this family heirloom. Mamie also prepared Emmett before he departed on how to speak and act around white people. As Emmett grew up in Chicago, he was unused to the ways that occur in the South. How to be proper, how to speak to white people. August 20th, 1955, Mamie and Emmett run off to the 63rd Street train station in Chicago, Illinois. It was a bittersweet moment for both of them. Mamie believed she had prepared Emmett on the differences between life in Chicago and life in Mississippi. And Emmett was about to embark on a solo voyage of sorts. Mamie was letting go of her young 14-year-old boy and allowing him to see the world, and a piece of the world that frightened her. And it would later become her largest regret. August 21st, 1955. Emmett arrives by that same train to stay with his great uncle Moses Wright in Money, Mississippi. He was excited to see his family and his friends and just have fun. It's important to remember that this was a different time. 70 years ago isn't that long. but it was a different world than any of us have ever experienced. In Chicago, Emmett could say things like, yeah, and no, to white people. He could light off fireworks. He could even whistle at a pretty girl. But this was Mississippi, and they were not ready for the clocks to be turned ahead quite yet. These were all social customs Emmett was still adjusting to when the date came to August 24th, 1955. Emmett Till, who was affectionately referred to as Bobo, along with his cousins Curtis Jones and several friends, ventured out to Bryant's Grocery and Meat Market. The market was owned by Roy and Carolyn Bryant. They were not exactly wealthy people, and most of the clientele of the market were local black families. Emmett went inside, and that is where accounts vary. There was an account that Emmett had a picture of a white girl in his wallet, and his friends dared him to flirt with the pretty white lady, Carolyn, who was once referred to as a Crossroads Marilyn Monroe in the store. There were also accounts that said none of that was true. Most notably, his cousin Simeon stated that was all made up by the other parties later. Carolyn Bryant claimed, and later testified, that Emmett, a 14-year-old boy, grabbed her hand while she was stocking candy and asked for a date. She also stated he followed her to the register and grabbed her waist. Historian Timothy Tyson interviewed Carolyn Bryant near the end of her life, and she allegedly said none of that was true. But Carolyn's daughter-in-law was present and stated Carolyn never said this. So I guess we'll never know. One thing Simeon, again, Emmett's cousin, did agree to was that despite never seeing Emmett touch Carolyn and Simeon entering the store a mere minute after Emmett did whistle. There was an eyewitness who disputed this whistle was directed at Carolyn, but regardless, the situation was officially elevated. Simeon indicated he immediately knew they were in trouble, as this was an unwritten law in Mississippi. You do not whistle at a white woman. Simeon only later realized Emmett had no idea what he had done, but his fear set in shortly after. Carolyn Bryant went to her car to retrieve her gun at this time, as her husband was away on a trucking job and she wanted to assert her protection of herself. Allegedly, Carolyn and her sister-in-law vehemently wanted to keep this information from her husband, as Carolyn was afraid of how he would react. But Roy did find out, and he and his half-brother, John William, or J.W. Malam, quickly found out where Emmett Till was staying. And that takes us to August 28, 1955, at 2:30 a.m. Roy Bryant and J.W. Malam arrive at Moses Wright's house, armed with guns and flashlights and other people in their truck. They refuse money and just want the black boy who talked. I will not use the language that they chose, but I think you can understand what they were actually saying. They threatened to kill Moses if he told anyone who took Emmett. Moses later stated in court he heard the men ask someone in the car if this was the boy, and that person, with a voice lighter than the man's, according to Moses, said yes. The men later stated Carolyn was not with them at this time. Did Moses hear incorrectly? I guess we'll never know. Roy and J.W. took Emmett Till away. Moses had other children to protect, and they were defenseless. Had they fought back, they all would have faced certain death. Malam first searched for a spot near a bluff, but it was so dark they were unable to find it. So they drove back to Malam's home around 5 a.m. The back of Malam's home had a tool house with 2 small rooms. It was here Bryant and Malam began pistol whipping Emmett, a trait Malam learned in the military. J.W. remembered a discarded fan from a cotton gin near the river. It was daylight now, around 7 a.m., and they were getting scared of being seen. So they took Emmett to the bank of the Tallahatchie River. They made him carry a 75-pound cotton gin fan to the edge of the bank. Then, they forced Emmett to take off all of his clothes, and in an unknown order, and we are unsure what was done at the tool house versus the riverbank, the men proceeded to beat Emmett Till, again a 14-year-old child, ferociously. They gouged his eye out. They beat him more, almost to death, before shooting Emmett in the head. There were indications also that Emmett's body was beaten even after his death. Then, as if that wasn't enough, they took out barbed wire, tied Emmett's body to the cotton gin fan, and threw both over the Black Bayou Bridge in the Tallahatchie River. The men, if you can use that term loosely, then returned home and burned all of Emmett's clothes. On August 29, 1955, J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant were arrested on kidnapping charges and are held without bond. On August 31, 1955, Emmett Till's badly beaten and decomposing body is pulled from the river. Moses Wright is able to identify Emmett because of that precious ring of his and the very detailed initials, LT. Back in Chicago, Emmett's remains are finally returned, and Mamie receives her beloved son's casket on September 2, 1955. Authorities had wanted to bury Emmett's body immediately. They didn't want it to come to light how badly this body was beaten. But Mamie would not have it. She spent, by some accounts, nearly a year's salary to get her boy home to her in Chicago. The casket was locked, as no authorities wanted this casket unsealed. Mamie wouldn't have it. When Mamie saw her son, she realized he was unrecognizable. The beating and torture this young boy endured had made him nearly unrecognizable to his own mother. And at the time, everyone wanted something. People on all sides were politicizing Emmett's death. Some wanted this to be a closed casket. Many, in fact. Authorities wanted this disfigured, beaten, abused boy to be buried as quickly as possible so they could move on. Mamie would not accept any of this. Against all advice, she insisted that this casket remained open. Mamie wanted the world to see the true horror that was done to her boy. Against all the objections, Mamie would not back down. Mamie changed the world. By insisting the casket remained open, Jet magazine was able to capture a photo of Emmett's beating and published it for the world to see. Thousands of local Chicago residents also saw Emmett's face. Racism in its true light. Ugly, vicious, sickening. Mainstream media later carried it as well, showcasing what was still happening down in the segregated South. Emmett Till was laid to rest on September 6, 1955 in Burr Oak Cemetery. Shortly after, the trial of Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam began in Sumner, Mississippi on September 19, 1955. Trial is using the term loosely. This was not a fair jury of any kind. No women or blacks were allowed on this jury. None. They were all white and all men. Well, Moses Wright did the unthinkable. Something that just never happened in Mississippi. And he testified against these white men. He named these white men in court. Once again, putting a target on his own back. Moses had to move out of Mississippi immediately after the trial. He moved to Chicago, and he never went back. Carolyn Bryant testified that Emmett said ugly remarks and grabbed her, as I described earlier, though his cousin Simeon stated otherwise. Mamie did travel to Mississippi for the trial, and she testified against all manner of threats to her well-being, suggestions to the contrary, friends and family telling her, don't do this. Even tolerating the defense's suggestion that this wasn't Emmett, that he was alive and well elsewhere. But she did leave the courthouse before the verdict. Mamie knew this world all too well, and she saw what was coming. A complete acquittal. The jury deliberated only 67 minutes, and one jury member famously said, "It wouldn't have taken that long had it not been that they stopped for a pop." They alleged the state had failed to prove the identity of the body. You know, the one that the defendants had allegedly beaten into an unrecognizable state. Well, the defendants, after the acquittal, also sold their story to a reporter for $4,000, where they bragged about the fact about killing the boy from Chicago. Yes, they made money off of this boy's death, and did confess after the fact. Because of this, they actually had to move out of Mississippi for a time. In 1981, J.W. Malam died of bone cancer. Roy Bryant died of cancer in 1994. Carolyn Bryant died in 2023 at the age of 88. No one ever served time for the murder of this little boy. The state and federal government also failed to interject with obvious kidnapping charges. No shame, no guilt in letting the murderers of a 14-year-old boy walk. Again, this was less than an average person's lifetime ago. Mamie Till-Mobley eventually married Gene Mobley, changed her name from Till Bradley to Till-Mobley, and they remained together until his death in the year 2000. She graduated from Chicago Teachers College and began teaching in 1960 because she believed education was the most important ally she had at her disposal. Mamie used this horrific event to dedicate her life to activism and awareness, to change civil rights. She embarked on one of the most successful fundraising tours in NAACP history, before parting ways to embark on her own activism endeavors. She advocated on behalf of poverty-stricken individuals and their access to education for decades. Mamie established the Emmett Till Players, a touring troupe of young students who delivered speeches about hope and unity because, again, Mamie believed in public speaking as a means of education. Mamie Till-Mobley died on January 6, 2003, of heart failure. She was buried next to her husband and near her son in Burr Oak Cemetery. She never saw justice, but her monument stated her pain united a nation. Mamie died before her autobiography was released, which was called Death of Innocence, the story of the hate crime that changed America. A line in that book is often repeated as it closes out with, quote, "Although I have lived so much of my life without Emmett, I have lived my entire life because of him." The legal definition of a lynching is any act of violence by a mob upon the body of any person which shall result in the death of such person. That shall constitute a lynching. The Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act was passed by Congress and then signed into law by President Biden on March 29, 2022, making lynching legally defined as a federal hate crime. It imposes criminal penalties, a fine, up to 30 years of imprisonment, or both, on anyone who commits a hate crime that results in death or serious bodily injury. It also makes anyone who conspires to kidnap, kill, or commit aggravated sexual abuse liable to these punishments. And it only took several decades to become a reality. Emmett Till was a young boy, only 14 years old when he died. He was intelligent, charismatic, and likable. He was not used to the customs of another part of a divided nation and was punished horrifically for it. This was a long time ago, but not a lifetime ago, where black children could not safely walk down the streets of parts of this country. I can't tell you how many times I've personally heard that black people in this country need to get over it. Move on. Times have changed. They have, sure. But this was not so long ago for them. Just because it makes some of us uncomfortable does not mean we should look away from their pain, their struggles, their journeys. Mamie knew that better than anyone. She was a grieving, traumatized mother who showed the world, the entire world, what true strength is. She rebuked everyone and pointed a finger at all of us, at humanity itself, and said, "Look what you have done with all of this hate to my little boy." She put a face to hate. Then, she dedicated her life to ensuring this stopped happening to others all around the country. Ferocious, independent, unwavering. If you're lucky enough to have a parent with this level of strength, as I do, celebrate them each and every chance you get. They're special and they're unique. Most importantly, celebrate the memory of Emmett Till and his mother's devotion to altering the course of civil rights in this country by forcing us to stare directly into the eyes of its ugliness. Hate has no home in America. And in 1955, the one place Emmett Till was safe was with his devoted mother, Mamie, in their home, which turned out actually not to be a place, but instead happened to be in her heart forever. So that's a story of what happened to Emmett Till and how his mother handled it, which I can't even tell you how powerful that is. I mean, I couldn't imagine handling it the way she did and facing the obstacles she did. It was a different time.
No, she truly handled this with grace, power, and strength, and she's absolutely a queen for everything that she did.
Slay queen is what we have right now. She's, I love how inspiring
White people,
it is.
Amanda, I tell you.
For the after the fact. But the fact that anyone had to go to those lengths to even see a glimpse of justice. I mean, we're in 2025. We still have problems ongoing, but think about it. It's only been 3 years since that was signed into law.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been gone for over 20. That's nuts. That's nuts to think about how long it's taken to put in writing and truly define the things that has made America ugly and hateful and said we'll no longer tolerate these things on the highest level.
Yeah, I wonder if they saw what the movie was coming. They're like, we gotta hurry up and get this thing going. You know? I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense to me. Because why did it take so damn long? Like, why?
That timing is wild.
Isn't it? It's pretty interesting.
It comes on the heels of Black Lives Matters protests and what was happening to a lot of black people during the time, that period.
True, and law does take a couple years to get in place.
A couple years?
Well, he's saying like between Black Lives Matter when that it's...
Get that. Peak. This should have been in place decades ago. That's all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I was thinking about a lot of this while watching the movie and while doing the research. This happened 21 years before I was born. That's not a lot of time.
No. That's why 70 years ago from this year is not long. This year's the 70th, I guess, I don't want to call it an anniversary. It's 70 years since this occurred, right? It's not that long ago. And it drives me nuts that people say, well, get over it. Move on. We've changed. America's changed. Da, da, da. It's not that long ago for people that have to deal with this. That's all. It's easy for us to say it because we don't have to deal with it.
And the thing that makes me really sad is that we are trying to find ways, and I say we as a country, it seems like, are trying to find ways to keep stories like these from being told on a regular basis to our children because it makes them feel uncomfortable, or because when we should, in fact, be like, this is what we were like. This is how we were. We need to do better from every single point of view moving forward.
Just keep
and also,
doing
if you
better.
see those
Keep doing
things,
better.
they're not acceptable. You step in and do something about it too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like that's the other component to it.
I just couldn't believe she went back to Mississippi. That was insanely brave of her.
That's wild. She's so much of a rock star for just standing up and going in there, and all of it is just incredible what she did. It's completely wild. Coretta Scott King was another one who was so inspired by the story to use this as a calling card for pushing for more equality, pushing for more activism, and she used this to drive more people to doing the right thing.
So speaking of that, what do you think of Mamie's decision to leave the casket open? Because that is really what spiraled and caused a lot of those effects. That's really what it was a proponent for civil rights. It really pushed the needle forward.
Bold. That's one word that I would use to summarize her decision. Because think about how horrid that must feel as a mother for people to see your child that way, for you to have to continue seeing them that way, and to share that with the world, the pain, the vitriol that he experienced, and say, come look at it. But it's bold because she wanted to get her point across. Like, okay, you guys really don't see how horrific this is. And also it was about not only bringing to light to everyone, but to unite the Black communities that maybe didn't have to experience it in that severity. So like she, in the film too, she talks about how, she was in Chicago. She didn't have to experience this level of racism. And so she would just kind of say, that's not my business. But then to say, no, we need to come together and unite as one to make sure this doesn't happen ever again. And that is where people like her and MLK have such profound impact is the unification of individuals together. Just say, okay, I understand you're scared, but we're going to work together to try to find a better way through this, because we can't just continue to accept this as the norm.
She made it impossible for anyone to look away. And that's the important thing, because you have people even today who still say, I don't see racism and I don't see color and I don't see this and I don't see that. But then you have cases like this that happen even today still, that you have to sit there and say, you have to look at this and be like, everyone take a look at what happened to this child. And she did exactly that. And she gave Emmett a voice that he wouldn't have had otherwise.
It just boggles my mind. I remember when my kids were little and you have to prepare them just to go outside and you want them to be safe, and you're always protective because dangers in the world and that sort of thing. I can't even imagine a world where another state's world is completely different than the state you live in, right? Like it's that different. It's like preparing to go to a third world country or going to a war-torn country or something along those lines, where if you get out of line, if you say the wrong word, if you have the wrong look, if you whistle, then horrible things might happen to you. I mean, I'll be honest, when I was a kid, I can remember whistling at girls, and I know it's inappropriate, now that I'm older and mature and da-da-da-da, but at the time you don't think that. You just think you're being a goofy kid and it's funny. It's nothing to ever attack someone over, like how insecure are these people? You know what I mean? I mean, it's a whistle, but that was the world. It was considered against the unwritten law of Mississippi, which is insane to me. And it was more insane that they just let them out, that they just let them go, that nobody had decency in that time period to say, no, they need to be held accountable, and then had the audacity to brag about it after they're cleared, because they can't charge them again. Just to make
Not
money.
only brag about it, they made money off of the story afterwards.
Either way, both factors are terrible. I don't even know if they're equally terrible. They're just more terrible. People suck. I can't for the life of me fathom thinking in any time period that's okay. We're going to looking at the pictures of that boy and thinking that's okay. We're just going to let these guys walk because, they're white.
Well, the way that it's poised in the trial, let's break that down. The way it's poised by Carolyn is that she was essentially sexually assaulted by this boy, which then they're going to present to be as a man. They're going to sexualize his actions as well. So then he's no longer seen as a child either. And that's what happened in that courtroom. She completely changed the way that this case was seen. It was no longer, what did he do, this boy, to have this happen to him, right? Like, that's the mentality then. But then it turned into, oh, this was like getting justice. And at that time, that's something that is permissible, like to people. To those individuals, those white men who are sitting there, well, you're not going to touch my wife, so I don't care who you are. If you're not white, then we'll take you out type of mentality. And that's where it got to where it was. And that's why I feel, even though there's no proof of Carolyn's hand in the kidnapping or the beating or anything like that, the proof of is in her. And oh my God, I'm irate thinking about this woman. And then to also realize that towards the end of her life, she allegedly told a...
Thank you for clarifying. Allegedly.
Yeah. doctor who was writing a book, and she was interviewing with him. And he states that she told him that no sexual aspect ever occurred, that was entirely made up and a lie. Well, she did end up denying those remarks later and things like that, and just basically went on to say nothing that boy did could have ever justified what happened to him. Is the extent of where she got in her
official capacity.
Official apologies. Yeah. Total see you next Tuesday. So... Yes. I have the perspective, like, you knew what you were doing, and you knew the way you were pitching it on that trial was to heighten and increase the outrage of the white men sitting there
to get your husband
and have them penalized.
And honestly, that shouldn't have been admitted into trial, because it really doesn't matter. Like, there's no justification. We're just trying to make it seem like, well, this is why this has happened to this boy. That's exactly what you're just explaining it to be. That's not ethical as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that is irrelevant. Even if it were true, which then you have people who are saying it wasn't true on top of that. But even if you take that aside, that piece is irrelevant to the fact that these two individuals then decided to be vigilantes and have way too much fun with it. Like, no, they need to be in prison. Well, they should have been eye for an eye, is what I'm thinking, for taking out a 14-year-old boy who did nothing wrong.
I feel like, at least Aaron and I have probably known guys like this, guys who you don't give a reason to do anything at all.
You don't think Amanda's known anybody like that?
Oh, I think when a woman knows somebody like that, it's a different story entirely, and I don't want to dig into that. But I know that I've met guys in my life, at any point where you're like, oh, this person you don't give any sort of excuse to for whatever the reason is, because they're not there for any other reason than to really cause terror and pain to somebody else. Like, these people exist. These people, and that's what I think we ran into here, is that they're not really these good guys who decided that they're going to stand up for their woman. They're probably, they're shitbags who decided, I have an excuse here.
That's all it is. Yeah.
And I'm going to go ahead and act out what I want to act out on, and I can probably get away with it because I'm white. That's exactly what it is, and especially in this case. But again, there's nothing vigilante-ish like about this. This is just somebody who found an excuse and took it to the extreme that they felt like they can take it to, and it is gross that they got away with it, because these are exactly the kind of people that the justice system was built to manage, and yet they still got away with it.
Got away with it, bragged about it, made money off of it, continued their lives. Yeah, cancer got them, but cancer gets a lot of people it shouldn't, so I'm not going to hoorah cancer. So they didn't really get penalties. They only got rewarded.
I'm not going to hoorah cancer, but I kind of want to. Is that what I heard?
I want to.
I'm just glad something happened to them.
Sometimes cancer gets it right. That's what I heard from Amanda.
Carolyn lived way too long. 72? She's given interviews? Way too long.
Stop.
Way too long.
Stop.
No, not stop. She willfully allowed these two individuals out. I don't know if she allowed them to beat and attack him. Probably. There's no way she doesn't know that. But she at least let them get away with it. She knew what she was doing. So I'm never going to not. No, she lived way too long.
Does any part of you, and I say this because Carolyn was hounded up until her death about this, right? She was seen as kind of the, hang on, let me finish.
I don't know if there's a point in finishing the question.
I'm gonna ask it anyway. It's not an easy question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Do you think, if you think back to the time, and also it was easier for a white woman, but it wasn't necessarily easy for a woman. Do you feel like she was under extreme duress to basically give that testimony? You know what I mean? I mean, if she has a husband that would do this to a boy, do you think some of this was out of her own fears? And does that, I'm not saying it justifies it, I'm just saying that feels like it would be a factor to her testimony.
She went above and beyond.
Okay. That's why I'm asking. I'm just asking.
Even if that were the case, no, I hear you. And I definitely know what you're saying, because women were also in not that severe of a position, but definitely also had to make deliberate choices of what to do or what not to do around certain people for their own safety or their kids' safety. I get that.
That's why I'm asking a woman. That's why I'm asking.
The way that she exaggerated and made more out of the situation, she could have answered questions more blanket, yes, no. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? She did not have to go. Exactly. She tried to dramatize it. She was intentional in that. And that's where I'm like, you are willfully complicit because you knew what you were doing too. And at the end of the day, I don't know how you could feel good walking out of that room, being married to one of those people, knowing that they brutally assaulted and murdered a child for possibly whistling at you. Maybe. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to be very gross and evil. I don't care who you are. I don't care what position you're in. That's somebody's baby too.
I'm trying to see if there's a way to play devil's advocate on this. And there's not a lot of different ways, aside from the fact that we all know that her husband was a monster. And it's possible that he came home, started being abusive, and she wanted to take the heat off of herself for a little bit and put that heat directly on somebody else. And she was able to recall this situation, but she decided to conflate the story even more to take the heat off of herself in whatever was going on and whatever reaction or abuse that she was taking from her husband at that moment. If I were to play devil's advocate, that's the only way I can see this happening. As far as if she had any sort of heart or soul to her, this is her just trying to justify like a little bit of peace for herself for a moment. It's not fair. It's not kind. It's not any of those things, but she willfully told somebody, whatever the reason, whatever story she could, to make this happen.
Other devil's advocate to the devil's advocate. This entire
Are you
thing,
devil advocating my devil's advocate?
I am. This entire thing started with Carolyn telling her, potentially in this example, abusive husband who's not right in the head, a story about this kid.
Well, now
she started it.
To be fair, someone else told him. She did not tell him initially. He was actually mad that she did not tell him. Just to clarify.
Well, damn it, Aaron.
that's just what happened.
Yeah, that's how facts work. But still, I still feel like she could have been like, "Oh, that's not what happened."
Oh yeah, I'm not giving a reprieve. I'm just asking a question. So, why do we do such a poor job educating people on our history? I mean, it's probably like too long of a question or too long of an answer for the question to do it really any justice, but
I don't think so. I have a very simple answer.
Let's roll.
Self-accountability.
Explain.
If we were to do a better job educating our people on our past faults, that would mean we have to take accountability and own that we were evil and vile as a country. Who's going to want to do that?
Nope,
People hate to take accountability for themselves, for their actions, for their mistakes.
Well, people love to say, well, I didn't have anything to do with that. I'm like, yeah, I get it. But
blame game.
Have you ever heard of trauma and the effects of trauma on an individual, on a family? I mean, if someone is assaulted in a family, right, that has ripple effects for generations, oftentimes.
Generations.
It's just, I just can never understand why people can't see that at all. They're just completely blind or oblivious, or they just don't want to do self-accountability. But that's why there's so much anger in respects to this situation, these situations. You know what I mean? Like it affects for generations.
As a country, we tend to prefer to move on rather than confront any of our ill doings. And in comparison to some of the other countries who have done gross things, Germany, which openly acknowledges how the Holocaust and Nazi crimes, the U.S., on the other hand, kind of vacillates back and forth between never fully recognizing reckoning with slavery, lynching, or segregation, and we do things like put up monuments to Confederate leaders and
facts.
Very few things about monuments for our lynching victims and people who, like Emmett Till, who launched a movement because of his loss. These are all things we do as a country, as opposed to lifting up the things that should be exemplified as we need to move forward in the right way from this. It's more about whitewashing and hiding it just to make sure that people don't have their feelings hurt. And the thing that's hysterical to me is a lot of the people who are saying they don't want their feelings hurt, or we shouldn't be putting our kids through some of these stories, are the same people who do really questionable things.
Fair points. Well, I talked earlier about how I learned about Mamie and Emmett Till from where I grew up. Very close friend of mine when I was growing up. His mom had 2 pictures in their living room, and I'll never forget this because I did not know who she was at the time. I knew Martin Luther King. That was taught in school very, very early on. But she had a picture of Martin Luther King and Mamie Till-Mobley. And I didn't know who that was. I honestly did not know. And so I asked him at one point, and he's like, well, you got to ask my mom about, this. And I'm like, I don't want to know because I don't want to sound stupid, mostly. But I did, and she went through the whole story and why she was important. Like, I didn't realize what an icon she was from school or anything else. I learned it from my friend's mom.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, it was really sweet.
Yeah.
I love the idea of, like, how old were you at this time? Do you remember?
Probably 12, 13.
Oh my gosh, so you're around the kid's age.
Yeah.
Ugh, my heart. So she's like able to talk to a child too and like break down. I love that.
Oh, she talked. She was very direct. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I believe she said, your people did this.
Your people. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. So something I dug up that I found fascinating about how the Emmett Till case changed the world, not just the United States, but changed the world. The Soviet Union used the Emmett Till case against the United States in very many ways during the Cold War because the United States was trying to port itself as this leader of democracy and how it's supposed to take care of its people and, blah, 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 all these reasons. Whereas the USSR came in and they started talking about how we are a bunch of hypocrites for even talking about this, especially because of the Emmett Till case.
Well, no, let's move into the movie itself, right? So we've talked a lot about the case. Let's talk about the movie a little bit. Now, in 1955, if you didn't know what it's about, after Emmett Till is murdered in a brutal lynching, his mother vows to expose the racism behind the attack while working to have those involved brought to justice. It starred Danielle Deadwyler, Jalyn Hall, Haley Bennett, and Frankie Faison, and was directed by Chinonye Chukwu. And I hope I said that right. I apologize if I did not. So as a standalone film, now, if you ever listened to our other podcast, The Hollywood Outsider, when this came out, I raved about this. And that, I kind of explained why this movie hit me in some respects, because I had like a personal history in some respects to the knowledge of Mamie, and seeing it brought to life really kind of brought some childhood memories back for me. But without any real knowledge of the case or not detailed knowledge of the case, what did you think of the movie itself?
The movie was excellent. I stood there and watched this from beginning to end.
You stood? You didn't sit?
No, I stood. Yeah. This is the kind of story you stand
Fair
for.
Enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. And I watched every moment of this movie just kind of engrossed with what was happening. And Deadwyler was amazing. She just captured everything on the screen, every little bit of emotion, every little bit of strength, every beat. She was perfect.
almost perfect movie.
Ooh.
I feel like it could have been cut by like maybe 10, 15 minutes. The first half of the movie feels like it doesn't have the same pacing as the second half of the film.
I can understand.
Especially once you get to Mississippi, it's quick. Like you're kind of in and out. It almost feels like, which I'm sure is very real, but it just makes the film feel a little bit off timing wise. But when you think about every element of it really bringing to light the conditions, the circumstances of why, I hate to say this, but I'm going to say this, why this mother wailed so much. Like she was in total horrific screaming, like the pain that she was feeling that we get through this actress is very brutal. And I feel like at first I was like, wow, this is like almost too dramatic from like a film standpoint. But once you start to understand more details of the case, you're like, no, she hit it perfect. Because I can't even imagine, I'm not a parent, but I can't even imagine going through what she went through, having to see what she did, and then basically try to use that to change the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh man, but such a great movie. I was really impressed with it because it gives you so much knowledge of, like I said, the circumstances and conditions of that time period. Also, for her specifically, and also from Emmett Till's perspective. You get Mamie and Emmett's perspectives built in here, and I really liked that too.
For me, I think it's one of the most powerful films of the past decade. Honestly, I was so irritated that Danielle Deadwyler was not nominated for an Oscar. I mean, she was nominated for a SAG and a BAFTA and stuff, but not an Oscar.
That's disrespectful.
I thought so. Man, I remember when I
didn't know that.
Go back and listen
That's
to our past Hollywood Outsider episode. I was so pissed that she did not get nominated. I still believe she should have won, number one. She was my pick for the best performance of that year. And we don't do actors and actresses. We just do act like as a whole. And she was the best performance of that year for me and still holds up. Rewatching it, I've seen the movie a couple times since it came out. It hasn't faded at all for me. I still feel like, and the wailing, I get what you're saying, because there are extremely emotional outbursts of certain magnitudes at different points.
From like an actor's perspective.
Yes, but once you go look at the picture and you see what was done.
Oh my gosh.
I can't imagine responding in any other way.
Anything different, yeah.
I just can't. I just can't. I mean, I would either respond extremely angrily or very emotional, or I don't know, probably just put my best Liam Neeson face on and leave the house. You know what I mean? So I don't know how you handle a situation like that. I think
either one honestly might be acceptable in this circumstance.
Fair enough.
So
I disagree with you on the pacing. I think the early going is important to establish their relationship and how they are kind of reliant on each other. And it's almost, as soon as he leaves his mother's gaze, he forgets the lesson she taught. And that's pretty common, I think, in a 14-year-old boy. You're going hanging out with your friends and you get a little too relaxed, you're having too much fun, and you do something stupid you're not supposed to do. But for him, it was, a fateful mistake that he should not be punished for in any way, shape, or form. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, when you get with your friends and you get with your family and you forget lessons that you've been taught. And he was very important to her life. I had that relationship with my mother. I was very, very, I'm still very close to my mother, and we grew up as she was a single mother, and I know how that relationship is. It's just a very, very impactful relationship. You become kind of best friends in many respects, and so it's not just a kid. It's even more. And I know that doesn't sound fair, but it's more than just a child. It's like a lifeline, or it's a soulmate in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be too sappy. So some interesting notes about the film. The film uses 27 years of research by Keith Beauchamp, whose efforts led to the reopening of Emmett Till's case by the United States Department of Justice in 2004, which is exciting and interesting. In an interview on NPR in November of 2022, director Chinonye Chukwu indicated that she didn't let Danielle Deadwyler, Sean Patrick Harris, who played Gene Mobley, and a few other characters actually see the made-up body that portrayed Emmett's mutilated corpse until they actually started shooting the scene, which I'm sure had additional impact because, like we talked about. Simeon Wright, who was Emmett Till's cousin, he was an eyewitness of the event between Emmett and Caroline Bryant, and he served as a consultant to the project until his death on September 4th, 2017. Because again, this is a movie that was decades in the making. It was it took a long time to bring this to cinemas. It's noted several times that Emmett's father died overseas in military service. In fact, he was executed in 1945 after being court-martialed for killing one Italian woman and raping two others. They had actually separated or divorced in 1942, and the court did require him to enlist after violating that restraining order. So the horrible part about that whole story is that Mamie didn't know why he died overseas. Like they kept it confidential until this case came out, and then a senator from Mississippi, which I talked about in the read-through, released that information, basically trying to make Emmett look like he deserved something.
Tarnish his side. Yeah.
Absolutely terrible.
There's some speculation into that whole case that it's another part of our world history in which we treat black people unfairly versus white people, because during that time period in our military, 70 people were put to death for similar reasons. Almost all of them were black, aside from maybe 25, I think the number was.
I was going to say, this is a time period where maybe you do question some of those allegations towards black men in particular, right?
And he was actually partnered with somebody at the time, in the sense of like him and a fellow enlisted person did this. And so, but there's still very little evidence to prove it, supposedly, from what I saw. The movie didn't try to mention any of that, and I guess that's a good thing.
Well, I don't think it's relevant. I do think it's mentioned at some point, but I can't remember off the top of my head. It's not relevant to the case in any way, shape, or form. It's just not relevant. He barely even knew his dad, It's too bad. So disfigured in death, Emmett Till's swollen, unrecognizable face was made famous in that photograph by David Jackson, was first published in Jet magazine, and showed Mamie looking down at her son. So that's a very famous photo. If you've never seen it, you can easily find a copy of that. One thing that I thought was fascinating, Rod Serling wanted to write a television episode inspired by Emmett Till's murder, and the episode was greenlit, but ABC heavily censored the script after receiving thousands of angry letters from white supremacists. So when Serling created The Twilight Zone in 1959, he started using science fiction to address social issues more indirectly, which is the same approach that Gene Roddenberry took with Star Trek. And I find that fascinating. Now, I'm not saying it's why he went that direction, but it definitely was an inspiration of sorts.
Why do we care what white supremacists think?
Back then,
but still,
I don't know. You got me. Why do we care? Why did we ever care? Why do people still care?
I don't know.
I sure don't. I hope you're not listening to this podcast. I don't need your clicks. Sorry. No time for hate, man. No time for hate.
Speaking about white supremacists, and one of the things that I think I appreciated a lot about the movie is the way that they portrayed the perpetrators of the crime. You don't really get a good, solid look at the perpetrators any given moment. They're very much like...
They don't matter.
They don't matter in any way, with the exception of Carolyn, who you get a good look at Carolyn, but the two men, you don't really ever get a strong look at them, except for maybe a couple seconds here and there in the courtroom. When it comes to the kidnapping, you don't really see them. When it comes to other moments, you don't really see them. It's a flash as far as what you can see about them. And I think that was a very good and effective way to tell the story in a way that it wasn't about them. It was about how people like them behaved.
Now, I feel very comfortably that this is a near perfect account of the events. I think it does actually a very wonderful job. Honestly, I could have done with an even longer epilogue of things that she accomplished after the fact and people that she inspired by her actions in terms of Mamie. Outside of that, I have nothing more that could have been done. I thought the performances were fantastic. I really love, even though they never really had the conversation the way that the film portrays between Mamie and Moses, I'm glad that it was represented on film, because she did say famously she did not blame him for his death, but you can see a mother saying, why didn't you do more? And I think they just needed to explain his point of view, because in the modern age, people would look at that and go, why didn't you protect him? Why didn't you protect him? Well, it's a different world, man. Like, it's not the world you know. That's why he knew that they'd all be killed if he really fought against them. And I thought that was an important aspect, even though it wasn't necessarily exactly the conversation that was had.
Like, in today's world, they can probably pull some sort of self-defense thing, some sort of castle doctrine to sit there and say why how he was able to do this. But it doesn't stop, even in today's world, it wouldn't stop the mob of people that would show up and still make his life a living hell.
So is there anything you guys can think that you would have done differently with the movie?
As you mentioned, it's a near perfect movie. The only thing I can think of is to really bring home more about how the black press had an impact on this, not just like mentioning Jet Magazine here or there, but to really push the story that because she was so communicative with the black press and how much she engaged with them and showed them, and like even drive that more home, that they were such a huge part of the story and why it was able to get out into the world. That's the only thing I would probably do, is find a way to make that more impactful.
Basically, we all want a second one that goes into what happened next.
Absolutely.
And the impact this entire case had from there on.
Absolutely. Well, in closing, Mamie famously said, "You just have to use your time wisely, efficiently. There is no time to waste." I couldn't agree more. If you enjoyed this podcast, share the show on your social media outlets, please. Give us your review on your favorite podcast app. You are always our best source of promotion, so please tell your true crime friends about it. Thanks for listening to Inspired by a True Story. Go see Till if you haven't seen that movie. Read up on the history of Mamie Till-Mobley if you don't know that history. She was an amazing woman who really, really, truly changed the world, and how many of us can ever say that? Now, let's keep those artists honest.